Many people wonder what an illusion is and how it works. An illusion is simply just proof that you don't always see what you think you do, due to the way our brain and our entire visual system perceive and interpret an image. An illusion has more to do with how your brain works and less to do with how your eyes work.
You're a shark and I'm swimming. My heart still thumps as I bleed.
What was the purpose of the study? To investigate the changes of corpuscular excitability during kinesthetic illusions induced by tendon vibration. Who were the participants? What were they asked to do? Had 15 healthy right-handed volunteers, 8 men and 7 women from 23 to 50 years old, participated in the study. Made them relax their forearm muscles during the trials, and experiments were carried out to make it seem like their body was moving when it was not, by vibrating the relaxed forearm muscles. What was the purpose of the study? Examine the outcome density effect in young children. Who were the participants? What were they asked to do? From birth to 12 years old. Trials randomly presented in 2 blocks of 12 trials each. If outcome probability actually biases children's performance, they give high rating to high probability and low rating to low probability. The only aspect in which the contestants differed was the outcome probability. These results are consistent with an outcome density bias.
The purpose of this study was to investigate the illusion of motion caused by autokinetic movement as a sound source. In 2 experiments, 2 points of variability were determined for autokinetic movement. Autokinetic movement occurs when a fixed or non-distinctive point of light appears to move in a dark environment, with no other visual points of reference. In Experiment 1, 180 undergraduate volunteers participated and received extra credit in an introductory psychology course for their involvement. Participants were individually blindfolded and led to an acoustical sound retarding chamber manufactured by the Industrial Acoustics Company in New York City. Their heads were secured in a head and chin rest and were asked to listen to a single sound for 180 seconds and verbally say if they notice any changes in pitch or intensity or movement of the sound source. The sounds played for each participant ranged from 1,000 to 5,000 hertz. In Experiment 2, 40 participants participated. The same conditions were met, except participants were permitted to be free from the head and chin rest. The light was then shut off in the chamber, and participants' blindfolds were removed. Next, they were asked to focus on a luminescent piece of plastic which glowed purple in the dark. The results. In Experiment 1, neither sound frequency or intensity affected perceived number of direction changes of the sound source. Intensity, however, did affect reported loudness changes. Unlike Experiment 1, intensity level significantly affected the number of direction changes reported by the participant. The purpose of this study was to study the attraction between senses and to define the interaction. Auditory and visual capture produces temporary interaction of visual events by audio events. 10 participants, 5 women and 5 men aged between 19 and 43 were involved in Experiment 1. 5 subjects, 1 woman and 4 men participated in Experiment 2. All were naive to the purpose of the experiment except for the author. The sounds, beeps, were played through closed headphones at 880 Hz for 20 milliseconds duration. The visual events were white Gaussian blobs that flashed once for 10 milliseconds on a black background at the center of a computer screen. Participants gave their responses by clicking the left or right mouse buttons. The offset between the flash and the beep of each pair was as follows: -200, -80, -40, 0, 40, 80, and 200 milliseconds. Participants in Experiment 1 were instructed to attend to the flashes when answering while disregarding the beeps, while subjects in Experiment 2 were asked to focus on the beeps rather than the flashes. Altogether, the results show that the attraction when the flash happened first was more effective than when it happened second. Time shifts were not significantly different and showed that the visual flashes had made little difference on when the subjects perceived the sounds.
purpose of the study was to determine whether or not the viewing angle of an optical illusion has an effect on whether or not the individual perceives the illusion or not. 36 students from a perception psychology class at the University of Toronto volunteered to take part in exchange for fulfillment of course requirements. The illusions would each be presented separately. Each subject would be shown 3 illusions, the order in which would be randomized. While seated, the subjects would inspect the figures using binoculars in a free view, meaning without head restraint. There were 3 designated vantage points in which these illusions would be shown from. At each vantage point, subjects were asked to describe their impressions of key features of each display through a list of questions provided by the researchers. In all trials performed, the researchers found that the illusion is very apparent from the normal and is strongly reduced from the vantage points. The study found that the illusions are dispelled from a glancing angle. This result provides the opportunity to ask subjects about the real features of the displays. Given conflicting perceptual impressions, subjects can be asked to try and resolve this conflict. Implications were not evident in this study. Subjects comparatively unfamiliar with the particular illusions would be required to be candid. Otherwise, answers would likely be governed by past experience with the illusion being presented before them, not the implications, if any, present experience. The purpose of this study was to reveal the neural correlates associated with experiencing the moon illusion. Researchers sought to recreate the moon illusion in an fMRI monitored setting. The goal was to determine the neural correlates underlying the moon illusion. By modeling the illusion utilizing this technology, researchers are able to establish a relationship between the neural correlates and the correlates pertaining to the differing levels of size and object perception. 25 healthy individuals participated in this study. 12 of the subjects were female, while the remaining 13 were male. Participants were between the ages of 19 and 39 years old. All participants had normal or corrected to normal vision. Subjects were paid for their participation in a single fMRI session. Visual stimuli were presented using an MR-compatible 3D goggle system. A moon appeared at one of 2 possible positions, low or high. Participants were instructed to indicate via button press whether the comparison disc was perceived as being smaller or larger than the moon presented in the display. There would be 240 trials conducted, half with scene and half without scene. As expected, the researchers found that the moon was perceived as larger when presented near horizon and smaller when presented at the higher position. To elaborate on this, the moon was generally perceived as smaller when the scene was absent compared to when the moon was presented embedded into the scene. The brain regions underlying the moon illusion were revealed by an analog analysis of the fMRI data. The relevant interaction contrast revealed 3 significant clusters of activation. The strongest activation was located at the posterior end of the left fusiform gyrus, extending back to the temporal gyrus into the calcarine sulcus. A second activation was located in the early visual areas involving the right calcarine sulcus, in the lingual gyrus, as well as the left and middle occipital gyrus. The third significant activation was located in the right fusiform gyrus.
The purpose of the study was to reveal fundamental principles of visual processing through the investigation of the Ponzo illusions. Specifically, the study investigates the time course of processing the Ponzo illusion. The participants in this study consisted of 8 students from the University of Kazakhstan, Germany. 4 of the participants were male, and the other 4 were female. All participants had either normal or corrected to normal vision. Participants were seated in a dimly lit room in front of a monitor approximately 70 centimeters apart from one another. Participants would be asked to respond to the illusions presented to them using their left or right index fingers via a standard keyboard. Research found that for control stimuli, participants performed at chance level when bars were about equal length and were increasingly better at estimating relative length with an increasing difference between the bars. The principal mechanisms of perception evident through the usage of optical illusions are subjected to changes over time. The perceptual representations of our environment develop typically over the first few hundred milliseconds after stimulus presentation or exposure. purpose of the study was to find how assimilation and contrast correlate with the generating processes of various optical illusions. The participants in this study were 10 undergraduate students who had either normal or corrected to normal vision. Participants were unaware of the purpose of the study. Subjects were asked to observe various geometric figures. The researchers concluded mixed results. They found that solidity had no effect on the subject's perception of the illusions. However, contrast and assimilation did. The study indicated the Delboff illusion is a fundamental size illusion of assimilation versus contrast, and is determined only by the predominant control of the contour configuration itself. The researchers should try to further develop the idea that by introducing assimilation versus contrast in terms of the better explain more optical illusions with complicated combinations. Further studies are necessary in order to investigate the representation of assimilation and contrast, angle and direction, and space and proportion.